Thank you for the recording in action there. Today we're going to hear from Steph Ritberger on how she implemented this lesson with her learners. And then I will invite Heather to share, followed by Diana, unless you two want to swap that order. I'll let Heather share, and then Diana seems cool with that. This is a lesson that at LSS we did with all ESL levels. And so you'll get a little snapshot of that today, as well as how Steph used this lesson with ABE. So it really shows how one lesson plan that hits on all those standards can be used across the board in our programs. And at the end, I have about a 6-minute video that was created by TSTM with a master teacher, Leah Conklin, delivering the same lesson in Minneapolis. All right, Steph, I think we're ready for you to kick us off. Do you want me to share that screen right away, or you'll keep?
That would be great, yeah.
Okay, I'll get to that.
So while she's getting that up, I'll just say that the lesson choice, there are so many lessons in the toolkit that it was kind of hard to decide what you were going to pick and choose from. And for me, I started to listen to a lot of organic conversation in my classrooms. And because the holidays had recently happened, this was in January when I was choosing and starting to think about adaptations. And I had heard a lot about SNAP benefits and SNAP benefits not being sufficient to feed a family on, and what people were doing to supplement those SNAP benefits, and the kinds of nutrition that the families were getting from the SNAP benefits, and what they were having to do in terms of maybe supplementing by using food boxes from Feeding South Dakota or the Salvation Army, or maybe getting commodities. And there was quite a list of things. And there was a lot of conversation in the classroom, and actually kind of what stemmed choosing this. I had one student who was much more privileged probably than the rest of the class, and a comment kind of got put out there, well, I see people misusing food stamps all the time, and they're throwing high-end things or things that aren't appropriate into their boxes when they're into their shopping carts, when they could be doing something better. And so I thought maybe it was really a rich way to build community in the classroom, and also maybe a really smart time to kind of address maybe giving people some grace, and maybe giving them a realism call on what those benefits can do and how far you can stretch them. So there's the background and how I started, and thank you, Laura. So I shared out a Google Classroom right away, and the reason I did this, if you'll go into the classwork, you're going to notice that I didn't share a ton with them, but I wanted to kind of give them something that they could preview to think about in starting. And so I shared a couple of items in the classwork tab up at the top. Yep, right there. All right, so there's a USD guideline for eating healthy. And if you open that, what you're going to notice is there is a lot of things that are different than the old food pyramid. And so it was kind of a beautiful way to see a representation. And the thing that I really appreciated about this particular graphic was that it talks about reflecting on personal preferences, cultural traditions, and budgetary considerations right in the graphic. And so it was a nice little starting place. And then it talked about what you really need in order to eat healthy, and then eliminating the sugars and starches and being really careful with it throughout your life, as well as being healthy. And then we kind of went to the next graphic, which is in that, it's back in that, if you just use the back arrow, you'll get to the next one. And you'll see basically what it gives you are food groups on a plate. And those food groups on a plate are interesting because what they are, they kind of show you how you can eat and how you should be distributing kind of what you're eating. And so I used this one because I thought it was a really easy way for them to see this is kind of what your plate would look like. And I showed them how different it was from the food pyramid. So those were the previews. And then if you go back to that very main page, what you're going to see is after I had shown them that in the first week in February, so back in the stream, what you'll see is that I broke people into teams, and I had Cody and Alyssa, Jared and Tony, Moira, Pretty, and Steven working together. And so not a very big group, but a group that was pretty diverse. And I picked the people that were going to work together really specifically. I kind of picked people that could work together. I picked somebody who had a little higher reading level and somebody who had a little bit lower reading level so that they could help each other along, and maybe had a little better math skills or a little lower math skills. And then interestingly enough, I paired two people that were on the farthest end of the spectrum. Somebody who was using food stamps as the major source of their ability to purchase groceries, and somebody who had no idea that what food stamps really entailed or how much people were really getting from food stamps. So that's the reason I paired them up together in that way. And then what I did is, and I'm not going to go back to the coursework, but I'll just tell you what I did. I gave them 5 prompts. And the 5 prompts were, can you realistically feed a family of 4 on a SNAP budget? And so they really had to kind of do the math. They had to figure out what is the SNAP budget. They had to figure out, you know, that it's only $1.39 per meal that people are really getting. And they had to kind of adjust their thinking on that. So then the next one was, what is available as healthy options in the supplemental box? So they took a look at, you know, Feeding South Dakota, the Salvation Army boxes and the commodity boxes, and they had to kind of identify what was in there and what was actually healthy. The third prompt is, what is the cost of fresh food versus frozen or canned or dried foods, and what's the nutritive value? The fourth prompt is, what is the dollar value that you would place on supplemental nutrition boxes? And the fifth one is, what is the comparative cost of a family of 4 eating regularly who can afford produce, the fresh options versus the lower cost income boxes? And so that's kind of how we split it up. And of course, there was only 3 groups, so there were only 3 drawn. And what they actually got was the comparative value on the family of 4. And then they got the comparing the nutrition inside of those boxes. But what was interesting is they really answered all 5 prompts by the time they got done discussing them in groups. A couple of things that we ran into that were really interesting that didn't work so well. Right at the time we decided to do this, one group of people lived in the same complex and they had gotten some internet service that was free Wi-Fi for the entire building. And they couldn't Zoom with us because actually Moira and Pretty had a wall in between them. And so they were too close and we were getting all kinds of feedback because 2 different devices wouldn't allow them to work. So that was an interesting little issue in an apartment complex. And the other little glitch that we ran into are that our more entitled team member got schooled by our less fortunate person in the group, and maybe in not the best way. And I probably should have curbed that a little bit on the front end, but I didn't realize that that was going to happen in their group work outside of class. So those are 2 things I did have to kind of look at. And then just in terms of tailoring it, I think it was an excellent lesson. And I think it was a good lesson for all of us. I think some of the big big things that they really learned are that, benefits are based on the net income. When you look at a family of four, it's only $2,184 of net income that that family has. And then, that it worked out to $1.39 per meal kind of shocked them. And it really led to a robust conversation about why school lunches and breakfast programs are really, really, really important. And it led to a conversation about why the backpack and weekend programs and supplementing food sources when kids were home more often was imperative in being able to actually feed families in a way that gave them nutrition. So overall, it was a good lesson. Of course, I shared a few things that I learned on the not so good end, and I hope everybody can learn from my mistakes, because one was kind of significant, and I did have to kind of build some relationship back between those two students. But other than that, I think it was an excellent learning tool. And I'll let somebody else talk now.
Thank you so much, Steph. We have just a couple minutes for questions. Does anyone have questions for Steph on that lesson?
I do. Steph, did your students have to go out and find the data, or did you supplement that somehow as well?
Well, when we first started, I didn't exactly know where I was going to go with it when I was first starting to think about it. And then I started asking them a few preview questions in advance. And what I did is I went and asked Feeding South Dakota for a box. I asked the Salvation Army for a box, and I asked Commodities for a box so we could compare. And then just to make it a little easier and to not make them have to go so far, drive around town. So in terms of cost to the student, I didn't want to create an issue. So then the other thing I did is I did provide them the South Dakota benefits analysis. So those are things that I did, but kind of after we got going in the project, kind of realizing that they didn't know how to research that themselves. And so I talked them through how I would figure out how to get those resources. So instead of taking us, that's the other thing I should have probably told you, instead of it taking us, I had it planned for 3 class periods. It ended up taking 4 class periods. And then actually the discussion lasted into a 5th class period because they wanted to debrief more.
That's really a good idea. I had done something similar with the extension service. Will also come into your class for a series of classes and do the budget analysis on meals and everything and actually cook with your class, or they'll do it online too. That it was really awakening to me as well.
I saw that Nikita said TSTM lessons always seem to take longer than the recommendations. And I would say amen to that. But what I also learned from that is that the students are more in charge of their own learning. And so that's not always a bad thing. It's just that you have to plan for a little extra reflection time and a little extra debrief time, because sometimes they walk away from it and they think about more things that they wish they had learned, and then they come back and ask, and then you kind of have to address it because you put it out there.
Steph, I like how you shared lessons learned. You had mentioned the friction or tension that was engendered with this activity, maybe some socioeconomic status differences and relationship building. You talked about the importance of them making the connections to other federal, state, and local programs, backpack programs, free and reduced lunches, etc. I really like that. Were there any other recognitions or revelations for these handful of students in terms of, you'd also talked about caloric or nutritional value. Were there any revelations as it relates to diet or financial literacy or consumer literacy?
Yeah, I mean, kind of what came out of this, one group really broke this down in a really interesting way. And they figured out that really you could not feed a family of 4 for less than about 550. And people on the higher end who can afford fresh produce and better meat or better sources of protein were probably spending in the 650 range on groceries. And so it was a great realism to understand that the typical household's only gaining $249 in supplemental nutrition benefits. And so that was, the realism was that there is no way to feed a family on that unless you're supplementing in some way. And so then there was a realism that those families have to hustle if they want their kids to eat nutritious meals. They have to hustle in some way and figure out how to make that work.
Did they get to the point where, because like you noted, I think the key word here is supplemental, right? And
Mhm.
so was there that philosophical connection, you know, of, hey, this is, I don't know, because SNAP, that's considered a what, needs-based program? Is it also considered an entitlement program because it is needs-based or not? And I'm just wondering, you know, philosophically, this is supplemental. It's not supposed to be a primary, right, food stipend necessary. But I just wondered if they got into that at all in their discussions.
I'll just tell you that that's where the friction began. And the friction actually came into play because somebody who had probably never struggled to have groceries at home essentially really kind of filled in everybody else on why it's called supplemental nutrition program. And the one student who has several children at home and is very conscientious about what they get and is trying her best to give them their very best, schooled him on how difficult it is to make ends meet on one income with supplemental, you know, with just SNAP benefits. And she really spelled out the fact that more than a third of her salary is going to housing. And I mean, she was really, she was actually very much an advocate for herself in that situation. And I appreciated the fact that she kind of spelled out the fact that her income cannot stretch far enough.
Well, I think I mean, there's so many layered and leveled opportunities for learning and growth there. Kudos.
Thank you so much for sharing, Stefan, for all of your questions. As we go on today, keep note of other questions that you have, and we'll make sure to address them today or afterwards if we need to. Thank you, Steph. How fascinating. It makes a lot of sense. And love what you were able to equip your students with, not necessarily intentionally, but that's a pretty powerful interpersonal skill in building empathy and even practices of equity. Heather, please share with us how you implemented this lesson.
Okay, well, first off, I'm teaching 2 levels of English here. So I was teaching the oral 1 students, which is our very, very lowest level of English. So I'm going to show you what we were working with. And this is like a 3-week project, not a 4-day project. And you'll notice there's a huge difference between Stephanie's and mine. But our goal with oral 1 was just to be able to look at a almost realistic flyer for groceries and be able to budget, say, $20. And I'll show you how we got there. Okay. So let's see here. So to start out with, we worked on number pronunciation and counting because basic oral one students may not be able to even say their numbers yet. Sorry, I should have gone through some of these first. Get rid of that. So we even talked about money for a little bit. How much is a $1 bill? How much is a $10 bill? And we talked to practice adding $10, practice adding 5s and 20s and 1s. Didn't go past that so much, just some very basic math skills. So after we did some math skills, we went into talking about healthy versus unhealthy, and we talked about foods, hand washing, exercises, etc. Just anything that would elicit a response from our students and get some sort of conversation going. So we have quite a few there. We also talked a lot about food and building the vocabulary so they were able to talk about what they wanted to shop for and budget for. So we went through all the foods, or a lot of them anyway, lots and lots and lots of foods. And this is actually, I should tell you, this is the packet that our students actually were working from. So these are the pictures they had to work with. And everyone was online at this point. So our students would come and pick up the packets and use the packets at home. And we would tell them, okay, go to page 12. Today we're working on page 17. So after all the vocab building, working on numbers, working on counting, then we got into some budgeting. And we talked about, okay, we have $5, and we made sure we knew what each picture was and what each item cost. And we talked about, we had $5, what can we buy? And each student had their option to go shopping per se. And so we did this with every student, and then we upped it to $10 and then $20. So they were able to go shopping for the same items, but with different amounts of money, 15, etc. So ultimately, in the last week, they had, I didn't give them an actual flyer because I thought it was too complicated for oral one, but I did look at a flyer and take some of the items I saw in a flyer and remake it so it was more readable for them. So like chicken and lamb and donuts. And we did talk about, is this good food? Is this healthy, not healthy, etc. And we practiced different budgets. Today we had $20. Today we have $10. And they went and they made their food choices. I would say I think about 80% of my students were able to go shopping on a budget. The biggest hindrance that I found would be just being able to listen and understand. So the listening comprehension. So some of my lower students, just their listening comprehension isn't there yet. So maybe they would go over and they'd have, $12 of food. And so the other students would help and they would be like, no, only $10. And they'd have to reconfigure and try again. So it was actually a lot of fun. The students and I enjoyed it, and I thought it worked pretty well. Like I said, this is 3 weeks of material for my class, so I was happy where we ended up with this particular class. And then I also teach oral 3, and I pulled up theirs too. Let's see. So oral 3, it was a little bit, obviously they're a little bit higher, so we could talk a little more in depth about some of the ideas. And with oral 3, we actually created Hawa. And Hawa is an African student that works at Sanford, and she's gaining weight and she has all these problems. And they got to listen to the story and we got to discuss the story. And then we we were able to go back to the story with the ideas that we were presenting in the classroom and consider, what can she change? Again, we did the healthy versus unhealthy. But what I wanted to get to is, and we also talked about the food pyramid or the plate here. But this one, they really liked this one. We talked about how much sugar is in different drinks. And they were really amazed. Like, some of our students love orange Fanta. Well, orange Fanta has a ton of sugar and they didn't realize this. So they really appreciated that. And then we talked about, drinks versus the actual fruits, and just really discussed sugar intake as one of the healthy ways to make choices in their food selections. Went through nutrition labels, how they cook their food, do they bake them versus fried? And we came back to Hawa. There was 2 parts to her story. So they loved Hawa. We actually took Hawa to the next couple of months. So Hawa has been a good, a new student for us who comes to class virtually on the paper. And we also did the budgeting with them. Of course, they're higher. We were able to take pictures from an actual ad and discuss budgeting with a real ad and work a little bit on estimations and adding. And we went online, at least in my class, I know we went online and looked at like the Walmart ads and talked about foods there. I'm out of words to say anymore about oral 3, sorry. So.
That's okay, Heather.
Yeah, and I'm trying to remember, it's been a while,
I know.
but it was a good good month. And again, that is 1 month's worth of planning there for that class.
Heather, one thing I appreciated as you were showing your worksheets was your attention to finding actual pictures of the food and not like cartoony, clip arty representations of food. I think that's so important, especially for our lower level English language learners, to see the actual food and not some weird food-like picture. And I know how hard it is to find good pictures like that too. I know how much time that must have taken you.
Thankfully, some of them I had pulled from before, so I was able to recycle and add to some of my older lesson plans, but you're right. And I agree. I mean, if I give my student a drawing, for example, I had a drawing, very nice drawing of a neck one time, and my student looked at it and said, "Oh, that's a monkey." I agree. After looking at it, it could be mistaken as a monkey, just the shading and everything. So definitely the real pictures are so much more help for our students. Any other questions or comments?
I have a comment, a couple of comments. I mean, I'm just really so impressed between navigating socioeconomic tensions and discussing social welfare programs and unpacking, the topic of weight gain and healthy choices and sugar content and nutritional labels. Heather, I love the fictional student who's accessible and relatable and can engage the group as a common denominator. And then who can persist throughout your lessons. I think that's a really great way to contextualize the learning. So just congratulations. On your oral 1 class, you had talked about some of the challenges, particularly maybe some listening comprehension. In that error analysis, do you think it's largely listening comprehension, or were there some deficits or challenges related to numeracy and mathematics as well?
It can be a combination. I mean, I know those students, one in particular is actually really, really good at numbers in their own language, but they have other problems that make it really difficult for comprehension. So combination is my answer, depending on the student. And that is why with Oral One, we worked a lot on numbers before we even started looking at vegetables and budgeting and so forth.
Heather, I wanted to share with you, you have a few comments if you didn't see them, that your teaching is so amazing. I'm so impressed not from me, although I am impressed with your teaching. So it could have been me. And Heather, what a nice job. So interesting. Your work is very challenging and you made it look easy. I think the outcomes speak volumes. So thank you, Steph and Judy, for sharing your feedback with Heather.
Well, thank you. It was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it.
Heather has become one of our lead curriculum developers here at LSS, and you can probably see why based on her demonstration of content today. Thank you very much. Anything else for Heather before we give the floor over to Miss Diana? Well, Diana, we'd love to hear what your outcomes were, your experience in teaching this lesson with your students.
Sure. My students happen to fall in between Heather's Oral 1 and her Oral 3. So I teach an Oral 2 class. Let me share my packet. You'll see where we were at.
So Diana, not to interrupt, but for context for other teachers, this level would be like a high beginning, low and high beginning. Heather's Oral 1 was like a beginning literacy ESL, and when Heather was talking about Oral 3, that would be our intermediate level students.
Right. Yes. So with my students, I knew that we were going to be coming into some opportunities for discussion, and their cultural backgrounds did not really lend itself to opening up and having discussions. So I wanted to bring out the idea that communicating and sharing opinions and negotiating agreement or disagreement is a natural part of learning. So I stopped way back into this, this thought process because I wanted to have fruitful and engaging conversations in the lesson. So I started back with talking about communication and talking about negotiation. And so we practiced some things in asking each other questions. And I used images so that they could also understand better what these larger academic words really meant. Not just yes or no, but agree, disagree, opinion. They really liked the idea about having an opinion, and they really liked that they could give that opinion and not feel like they were having a wrong or a right answer. And that was really important. I didn't want them to be stymied by that thought process. So we gave them some ideas on what to say if they agreed and what to say if they disagreed. The one thing that I also threw in here is if I disagreed, I wanted to find out why they thought that. Because sometimes they come across an idea, oh, I heard from my whatever, you know, or I read or I saw on TV. So we just kind of to get an idea. And I was the one that did that more often. Why do you say that? Why do you think that? My students didn't really pick up on that, but it helped them to see me dig deeper for your opinion. I needed a why, because, which they know is one of their goals, is to be able to give a why to their reasoning, because that helps them get into the next level class. So we also did some self-assessments. I gave them prompts and they went out to a breakout room, they communicated and they came back and they had to report back, were they able to complete these 3 items? Did they communicate with each other? It wasn't just one person talking all the time. Did they negotiate, or did they always agree, which was okay too? And then could they tell me what they talked about? So we did this a little bit too, just to build a comfort level working with each other. So they didn't always go out the same person. I grouped them differently every time. So we started about with our health vocabulary, talking about weekly, monthly. What does that mean? Do I eat that food every day? Do I eat that food weekly, once a month? Just putting in some of those words. Healthy meant not sick, right? And lifestyle. That was really, they loved learning that word because they realized that there's different things that they can do, not just eating, that could help them stay healthy. Right? The word choose, something that they have to do. They choose. This came in very handy when I gave them 2 options and they have to choose. So it's a word that has been continued into my classroom as well. And I didn't say not healthy. I chose the word less healthy because I don't want them to feel like they can't have a piece of cake or they can't drink a soda, but I want them to realize that it's a less healthy choice. Not that they can't do it, it's just that something I wouldn't do daily, or maybe I wouldn't do weekly. But it's okay for parties, or it's okay for big celebrations. So they like that idea as well. So then I had just pictures of healthy food. Sorry, they were able to go through and name that. And we talked about, do you like it? Do you eat it? No, I never do. And it made me really miss having them in class, because when I do this type of a question and answer, I can kind of hear something, a type of food that maybe no one has ever tried before, because they don't want to spend their money on something they don't know what it's going to taste like. And I've brought in that food and we've shared it amongst each other, and sometimes they like it, sometimes they don't. But then they're like, oh, now I know this food, I can go eat it. So I missed that part of in-person classes for that. I too shared the nutritional plate. We talked about exercise. And then how often. So we practiced that word, the how often words, every day, every other day. I never exercise. Some of them, I never exercise outside my house. Inside my house, I run after the children. So different ideas, right? And talking about sleep. Some of my students were getting 4 hours of sleep, and we talked together as a group how maybe that's not healthy. Maybe try for more sleep if they can. Right? And then we had just small conversations. I taught the conversation, and then as we learned this conversation, it was something that I would put in every day during the month that I was teaching this. I'd ask them, have you done your shopping yet today? And they're like, no. And I'm like, oh, I heard potatoes are cheaper at Walmart. Or, oh, I heard apples are cheaper at Hy-Vee. And so they could respond back to me, and then they started doing it with each other. I found that many of them don't make a shopping list, even though we did practice this vocabulary. Favorite is a hard word for them. They want to give me a litany of, and they had to choose one. So that was difficult. And then I wrote it out for them because some of my students are not literate. So I wrote it out on a whiteboard, and they were able to write the names of their favorite vegetable or fruit to have. So And American food, pizza. It's a choice. We talked about where you go. And sometimes in answer B where it says because they're cheaper, I got because it's closer to my house. Because I have to walk there, right? So it gave them opportunities to change the conversation, which I encourage. We talked too about different things, salt, flour, coupons. I found that many of them don't drink alcohol, which didn't surprise me. And again, we talked about, do you use, do you eat, do you buy, do you like? Then we got into our budget. They really liked this as well. What's income? What's expenses? And they could tell me. I just had a few things like utilities. They talked about their telephone. They talked about the car that they can't afford to have, so it's not in their budget. Cars are expensive. So they were able to engage into this part of this budget vocabulary. Then we talked about some budget phrases they might hear. I'm on a budget. I can't afford that. I'm on a budget. Or I'm counting my pennies. But thanks to my coworker, Rihoko, she thought about cost effective. And so she brought this to the packet, which my students really liked as well. And then we had a little bit of practice. What's cost effective? If I have $20, cooking at home or eating in the restaurant, right? Buying used or buying brand new. Right? So then we had some more conversations that we learned. And they have the print in front of them, but they were taught, and then we did these conversations without the paper. Right? Then we talked about nutrition. And we looked at the nutrition labels. We concentrated mainly on, whoops, wrong screen. Oh, I lost it. Hold on. Technical difficulties. Sorry, pardon me. Let me screenshot that again. We concentrated on the nutritional labels. We only concentrated on these words that we were discussing, the sodium, the sugar, the fats. So they were looking at those. And then they were making determinations. Here's where part of their discussions had to come into play. Which nutrition label is healthier? And then we went shopping. And they had to do that together. And they had to think about a meal for the day. And then the idea was, could you do it on $5? Could you do it on $10 for your family? So that's where our oral 2 class went. So pretty robust and pretty in-depth, but my students dug right in, enjoyed it.
Thank you, Diana. You had a comment in the chat from Nancy. Thank you, Nancy, for your words. She thanked you for sharing your resources and strategies, Diana, and what rich learning experiences you have demonstrated.
I think it's really fun looking at Heather's lessons or Heather's packets in my packet, and just knowing that it's such a deep topic and that it can be diversified. And then listening to Stephanie's, like it's really wonderful.
Thank you, Diana. What questions does everyone have for Diana?
This is Nancy. I wanted to just express that that was actually intended for everyone who shared. So I do so appreciate your willingness to share your firsthand learning experiences.
Thank you for that, Nancy.
I'd like to inquire, from the TSTM lens and your curricular developments here, how did TSTM most inform these efforts? Clearly, obviously, you providers have worked with consumer literacy, groceries, foods, money, all of these topics. How did TSTM really inform these particular efforts, these lessons, modules, the 9 skills? Were there certain skills of those 9 that were instrumental here?
For me, I worked a lot with the skill of communication, and also there's a skill of navigating systems, which, and I think our American food products of nutritional labels for me is could be considered a food system. I mean, even with like Stephanie's, that definitely is navigating the getting free food or being on SNAPs and those government systems. But even bringing it down farther, how can they make a decision if it's nutritional when the American system puts nutritional labels on every box? And what do those words mean if I can't read them? So navigating our food industry system is probably what drove my idea with nutritional labels.
Similar, I think, to John's question, something I would be curious to hear from any or all of the 3 of you is what is different for you post TSTM? So if you were to teach a lesson on this topic before you were trained in or learned about TSTM in Heather's case, what is different about this lesson that is a benefit to your students?
I kind of put my answer in the chat, but truthfully, I want to get the most value for the time I'm spending with the students. So as many upper level critical thinking skills as I can get in, pack into a lesson, I want to pack in, because I want them to be getting the most out of every single class so that they're making the biggest educational gains that they can absolutely make in the shortest times. And I want them to have the information to be able to be very productive societally. So I think it's a different lens.
Yeah, I would agree with Stephanie that critical thinking piece is so important. I probably would not look at did not look at a lesson and think about how to create an opportunity for discussion or an opportunity for them to put in a personal opinion or to research something and find a solution to a problem. I might not have done that. I would have taught the content per se, but not necessarily thought about how they would utilize that content or navigate an issue outside of the classroom with something I've taught inside the classroom. So I agree, critical thinking for sure.
So I work very closely with teacher Amy on the oral 3 packet because she teaches 2 sections and I just teach 1 section. And I know with working with her, she also has all the words for navigation that Diana showed us at the beginning of her packet. I just skipped over those, sorry. But I know that for her, that's like super, super important. It's giving, your students the tools to be able to communicate and solve problems with within their own homes, but also at work, at the grocery store. And in talking with her, she really, really likes that ability to look at it and think, okay, how can I give my students something to really chew on and really think about and work on navigation and communicating with each other. I will second her opinion also. I mean, critical thinking has always been part of my lesson plans, but this just gives me more vocabulary to teach my students and more willingness to try some of those harder academic words, because oral 3 is, it's intermediate, but it's still actually a pretty low level of English communication. So it's a little intimidating to teach something like navigate or solution or some of these words, but they do so well. And I'm so glad I've been able to teach them these words.
Thank you very much, Heather. I did hear that echoed by some other teachers that weren't able to be here today that taught that same lesson. They really emphasize the importance of that language of negotiation, agreement, disagreement, kind of the project management language was really important for our ESL teachers to scaffold into the instruction over a long period of time in order for the students to be able to address a problem or conduct a project in a small group with limited assistance from the teacher. And Diana showed you some examples of what that looks like. Nikita, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I don't want to overlook you as one of our subject matter experts. Is there anything that you'd like to add to that conversation?
No, I think everyone did a good job. I agree with everything the other presenters said.
Thanks, Nikita. With only a few minutes remaining, I'm going to hold off on showing the video because the sharing and the discussion that we've had today was so rich and meaningful. My hope is that we can do a part 2 TSTM, and I would invite some of our partners in TSTM to join me in talking through the lesson plan. It might be helpful to show that plan next time and just highlight the things that you really liked about that lesson plan. I know for our ESL teachers, they weren't able to use all of it, but we'd like to get you some familiarity with that resource the next time that we get together and continue to just share with you the tools and the strategies that are available with TSTM. And I am so grateful for you amazing educators, staff, Heather and Diana, for sharing your work with your learners today. I learned a lot from listening to you, and it's, yeah, you've done some amazing things with just that one lesson that certainly was more than one day for all of you.
Yeah, I can do nothing but echo those sentiments. So well articulated. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, TSTM team and colleagues for joining us today. Really thoroughly enjoyed the scope, the professionalism, the thoughtful advocacy and interpersonal skills that you're helping our students navigate and contextualize. Compared to college and career readiness standards and the Red Book, I just find this so much more operationalized, actionable. It's really thrilling to see. I think these are standards in action. So terrific work. Keep it up. I'm hoping that we can continue to share and explore and pursue these skills in particular. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. See you everybody next month.
Bye now.